Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Lynn Nesbitt, and I'm chairing today's panel. Joining me on the panel is Doug Marks, who is sitting in our boardroom, and Kira Penner via Zoom. Representing the Assessment and Taxation Department are Jay Flood and Marina Tenuara, and our administrative personnel is Twinkle Sharma. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 6 on our docket today. Ms. Sharma, please affirm the assessor's and applicant's testimony.
Good. Ms. Assessor, please state your full name. Please do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you.
Ms. Assessor, please state your full name.
Morena Vantika Taylor.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Jerry Hofreimer.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. First on our docket today is file number 24-3426. This is 436 Main Street, and this is an appeal of the assessment of property. Is that correct, Mr. Reimer?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm assuming, Ms. Flood, you are the one who will be making the presentations today?
Yes.
Okay, then you may proceed with item number 1, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, file number 24-3426, roll number 13060880000, address is 436 Main Street, roll year for 2025, reference date of April 1st, 2023, for the assessed value of $2,028,000. We have it as a CMRST store. We do have a recommendation for this property.
Okay, go ahead, please.
We still have the 4 premises, the leasable area is 15,920. We have a 15% vacancy, 3% expenses, shortfall at $7. The capitalization rate at 7.95% with the new value of 1,564,000.
Okay, so if I can repeat that. If I wrote it down fast enough, you've changed some of the parameters. You have your square footage at 15,920. You've increased the vacancy to 15, and you've maintained the expenses and shortfall at 3% and $7. And you've maintained your cap at 7.95. And your new value is
1,564,000.
1564000. And what is your new NOI?
124,348.
134348.
124.
124. Okay, sorry. I'm getting a little bit of echo in your room, so sorry about that. Okay, Mr. Reimer, we have a new value in front of us, 1,564,000. Do you accept the recommendation?
I don't have instructions, Madam Chair, due to timelines, but I am in agreement with 1,564,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Panel members, Mr. Marks, Ms. Penner, any questions on the recommendation?
None for me, thank you, Mr. Chair.
No questions for me, thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to confirm again, one more time, to make sure, $1,564,000.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes item number 1. Well done. Okay, let's just get to the next one. Item number 2. Before we begin, I just want to confirm, Mr. Reimer, you're appealing 3 points of appeal, class, liability, and value.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I don't have the docket in front of me. Which property are we on now?
Item number 2, 245 Notre Dame.
245 Notre Dame. So yes, indeed, that is the 3 points of appeal. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Flood, you may begin.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
We have two properties in the same manner. Can we heard the 2 cases to one after the other one? One is the Notre Dame, the other one is the
73 Hargrave.
73 Hargrave, we do have as item number 3.
Okay, then it is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go with 245 Notre Dame first.
Okay. File number 24-2618, roll number 13060024000, address 245 Notre Dame Avenue, roll year 2025, reference date April 1st, 2023, assessed value $1,735,000. For this one, we do also have another recommendation.
Okay.
For the recommendation, it was a change to the rental rates for one of the second floor premises. I'll just compare it to my other. The leasable area remains the same. The potential rent now is $128,560. 5% vacancy, no change. Expenses at 3%, no change. Shortfall, no change at $7. With the new net operating income of $113,239, remaining the same 7.9% cap rate for a new value for the retail portion at $1,518,000. Or sorry, $1,433,000.
1,433,000. Okay. And that's the okay.
Retail portion. And
The
then we
retail.
have the parking lot portion at 85,000.
Okay, so that stays the same.
Yes, no changes to that yet.
So your overall value now is
1,518,000.
1,518,000. Mr. Reimer, we have a recommendation to reduce the value to 1,518,000. Do you accept the recommendation?
Actually, may I, if I could just have a minute, Madam Chair, this is a recommendation Ms. Flood and I were working on sort of in the very last minute, so just wanted to take a quick look here. Again, wouldn't have instructions, but I am comfortable with that value that's been suggested at 1,518,000 is to assessed value for sure. And then perhaps we can then just discuss the exemption issue that remains.
Okay, so yes, we do need to discuss that still. And so actually, Mr. Reimer, on the points of classification and liability, you will go first.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And so let's start with that. I note, Ms. Assessor, that you're not addressing the issue of classification and liability.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We have
Pardon me?
we do have rebuttal that we will address after Mr.
Okay.
presentation.
Okay. All right. So all right. Let's just start with Mr. Reimer. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Reimer.
Pardon me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we please on our submission go to page 15, which is the start of the submission concerning the liability to taxation and class code?
Yeah. Okay.
I do note that there's a typographical error. I lifted some language from a previous brief, but to be clear, what we're asking for is a school tax exemption for the portion of the property that's occupied by NEEDS, which stands for Newcomers Employment and Education Development Services, Inc. This is a charitable organization whose objective is to provide programming and services, and I'm at the bottom of page 15 now, to help recent immigrants and newcomers to Canada integrate into Canadian life. And there's a number of items that are included there: introduction to Canadian education, getting the younger folks that are new to the country sort of familiar with the Canadian education system, settlement worker in schools, again, to help the youth transition to the Canadian education system, enhanced wellness, educational assistance and employment programs, which includes tutoring, mentoring programs and job readiness, employment services, which is helps the immigrants with work experience, job mentorship and support, that kind of thing, employment readiness training, and psychosocial services. And this is now at the top of page 16. So there's a number of different services and programs that this organization provides. And again, it's all geared towards newcomers to Canada to help these folks who are often obviously coming into the country with very little or virtually nothing that would help sustain them, and they need assistance in integrating into Canadian life. And this is the organization that provides those services to these folks. If we go briefly, of course, one of the requirements of the exemption would be that it's a charitable organization. So if you go to our page 22, Madam Chair, this is the charity registration for this organization, confirming that they are in fact registered. And on page 23, they talk in a very summary way about the things that they provide. Pardon me, English classes, basic services for immigrants and refugees, rest practices for war-affected children, and social program counseling and such. So we're suggesting that certainly this organization would fall within section 23(1)(e), which is owned by or used, held in trust for and used by a charitable organization, which they are primarily for the purpose of giving relief to, and I'm not going to use the antiquated language, it's essentially to disadvantaged members of our society. If you go briefly then, I'm not going to go through every page, but I did want to draw some things to the attention of the board. We go to our page 26, and these are pages that were taken from the website of this organization. So it talks in page 26 it says, without the right kind of support, hope for these newcomers can quickly turn to struggle and despair. The organization offers newcomer children, youth, and families programming that makes integrating into Canadian life easier. Psychosocial supports in education, employment, mentorship, and recreation programs help the participants develop the life skills and confidence they need to succeed. So essentially, trying to set these folks up for success in transitioning to life in Canada. If we then, there was a couple of other, there's a lot of pages there. A lot of them are sort of graphical, and there's not a lot of words and wording in them. But I did want to, on page 42, and this is getting into the some of the other services that they provide. They talk about employment services that's provided if you're a landed immigrant or refugee status and youth ages 18 to 28 attending high school, can be employed or have previous job experience that doesn't disqualify them from participating in the program. So again, it's a question of, or a service that's provided to these newcomers to both try and maximize the ability of the youths, especially, to transition to the Canadian education system, and to try and set them up for employment after high school. If you take a look now to page, and this is the specifically on starting on page 44, the Introduction to Canadian Education Program. There's again a couple of pages that are don't have a lot of information on it, but if you turn then to page 46, talks about some of the details of the program, and you can see them there at the bottom of page 46. School preparedness, which is just learning about a Canadian classroom and expectations, etc. Orientation specifically to Winnipeg. English language skills development, because of course we can't presume that any of the newcomers coming to Canada would have much, if any, English language skills. Recreational activities, computer skills, and again, addressing common settlement issues, things like culture shock, decision making, making new friends. So again, the entire structure being trying to maximize the chances of success with the transition to Canadian society and in Winnipeg specifically. On page 50, this is now the settlement worker in schools. That was one of the bullet points that I had mentioned in the main body of our brief. So page 50, bottom of page 50 talks about some of the elements of the program. And I know in bullet 2, provide ongoing follow-up and support to students through their first 18 months of being in Canada to ensure successful integration into the school community. Very important, obviously, to try and maximize the chances of success and successful integration. Next 2 bullet points down, provide one-on-one or group orientation activities on various topics to enhance confidence building and integration. The next point, completion of needs and assessment and referrals for the purpose of identifying settlement needs and completing appropriate referrals to additional resources and programs. So again, it's the entire thing is structured towards, to structuring towards these disadvantaged individuals as they enter Canada and as they're integrating into the Canadian society and life in Winnipeg. On page 53, this is the Enhanced Wellness Program. And at the bottom of page 53, they talk about the program components, including delivery of a trauma-informed and culturally appropriate curriculum in group-based sessions that teach children and youth about identifying big emotions, learning about the brain and survival responses with some of the more difficult backgrounds that some of these individuals might have had in their previous experience. And again, one-on-one supports for children and youth to meet the needs of the challenges that they're dealing with as they start to enter the education system. Increase refugee and newcomer children and youth connectedness through homework sports. So again, it's a program that is again geared to helping these individuals as they are settling into Canadian life. Then finally, on page 59, some of the employment services. Towards the bottom of page 59, they talk about the work experience opportunities and on-the-job support. Youth are matched with partnering employers to provide meaningful and hand-on work placements. In addition, clients receive on the job mentorship and support to increase their chances of success in participating in the labor market. So overall, Madam Chair, our suggestion and the reason for the request for the exemption relates to the overarching purpose, and there's obviously a number of different programs that are just meant to assist newcomers in integrating into life in this country and helping these disadvantaged folks and giving them the best chance of success as they settle into Canadian life. Finally, I just note on page 67 for the information of the board, we've got a copy of the WASO decision, which talks about the fact that the leasehold interest, which is of course the interest we're talking about here, is sufficient to attract the exemption as an owner. The owner of the leasehold interest does qualify under section 23. So we're suggesting the elements have been met. There's a charitable registration. They do have the leasehold interest, and they provide programming and services for disadvantaged individuals as contemplated by 23(1)(e), and request the school tax exemption be granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Flood or Ms. Tenawara, questions for Mr. Reimer?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Reimer, you request the exemption under 23(1)(e) as I understand.
23(1)(e), there's elements certainly of education, Ms. Tenawara, but I am fundamentally relying on 23(1)(e), yes.
Oh. And my apology, I'm not kind of insultful anyone of talking about the language in the Act. If the language in the Act is very specific for the age, indigents and sick persons, Mr. Reimer aware about that and aware about that, right, Mr. Reimer?
Oh, absolutely. And if by the language of the Act, Ms. Tenawara, what I'm suggesting is these newcomers, which, as I say, these programs are geared to newcomers who are coming with obviously very little or virtually nothing. They would be considered indigent or very, very poor as they enter the country. So if you want to look at the specific wording, that's the indigent certainly is the individual definition, I guess, that you would use for the folks that this program serves.
Okay, that's where you put in, you categorize these people would qualify under this section.
Yeah, 100% under indigent or, as I say, very poor individuals. Yep.
Okay, that's all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Marks, questions for Mr. Reimer?
No questions this time, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Penner?
No questions for me. Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Reimer. Is this program open to all immigrants and refugees? Would they all be indigent?
Certainly, my quick answer would be it would be open to all. And of course, there are some newcomers that come to the country with resources, but fundamentally, I'd suggest the entire thing is structured around helping those folks who have very little or almost nothing when they enter the country. But you're right. I'm sure that they wouldn't restrict it by income level or the amount of resources that they came into the country with. But I would very much suggest just taking a look at the programming. It's really geared towards those folks who are particularly vulnerable, who need the language training, the integration into the schools, especially where they've got the more difficult backgrounds and in terms of some of the objectives of these programs. But it wouldn't be limited to just those, but certainly very much included with that category, the indigent.
So would they collect income information or?
I do not know. That I do not know.
And how long have they been operating at this premise?
Their lease, it's a month-to-month lease. I'm going to go back to our submission and I believe they were in there actually for a couple of years prior to, like they've They took occupancy in June of 2024.
So just very recently.
Yep. Yep.
And you say you've had discussions with the department on this already?
No, I mean, other than I had sort of reached out to Ms. Flood and members of the assessment department to see if the exemption would be agreed to, and they're not in agreement with the request. So that's where that discussion ended.
Okay. Right, we'll obviously hear from them as to why they're not in agreement. Okay, I think I'll leave it at that, and we'll see what they have to say. Okay,
Thank you.
Ms. Flood, Ms. Tanawara?
Madam Chair, do you want to proceed with the rebuttal evidence now?
Not rebuttal, no. Do you have any evidence in your?
We don't have evidence because we don't believe the classification. So we have only one income stream with all taxable. That's why we provide the rebuttal evidence until Mr. Reimer raised the question about the classification split. We don't see anything needed. Then we don't have anything provided.
Okay. Okay, so then we will look at your rebuttal, but we need, Ms. Sharma, have you distributed the rebuttal?
Yeah, the rebuttal has been shared on SharePoint. You can refresh, and it has been shared via email to Mr. Applicant.
Okay.
It's ANT rebuttals. There are 2 files.
Okay. Just give us a minute then. 2 files.
ANT rebuttal.
Which one should we be looking at first?
Item 2 and 3 is the context, and item 2 are the photos.
Can I clarify it? Yes.
Sorry.
We send the 2 rebuttals, but we are only using 1 rebuttal. The rebuttal for 73 Hargrave and
Item 2 and 5. Yeah, item 2 and 3.
The item 2 and 3 one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, give
rebuttal you can ignore.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, go ahead then.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Today I'm presenting a rebuttal for 2 properties. That's a little challenge here.
Okay.
I think
Excuse me, can we just focus on 245 Notre Dame?
Okay.
Thank you.
Or can you listen to both cases and do the rebuttal later?
We need to hear each property separately.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do the separate rebuttals.
Thank you.
The page number 1, there is a phrase from the Act 23(1)D and 23(1)E. I'm focusing on 23(1)E at this moment because as the Act defined, for the 23(1)E is owned by or is held in trust for and is used by charitable organization primarily for the purpose of giving relief of assistance to aged, indigent or sick persons to a maximum exemption of 0.18 hectares. For the case of Notre Dame, if you speak very general, we have a problem. We go through all the information about the needs. The needs is support for every individual immigrants who come to Canada. It doesn't say the income category or anything about it is not to serve for the aged people or very poor people or sick people. We have problem with putting this organization under one of those categories because It's very clearly stated in the section. It should be one of those age limits, age, indigent or sick people. But this is the place who treated anyone who come to Canada as a refugee or as an immigrant. I understand, of course, they have some problems, they have some challenges. It's not, that place is not defined for one particular people category. It's anyone who will come to as an immigrant, who will come to the place and they get treated. So we have very big challenge how we put these kind of organization and into those kind of section. That's why we are refusing to giving tax exemption, school tax exemption under 23(1)(e), as talking very briefly. Yeah, you can see the pictures of the page number 3, 4, and 5. Everything Mr. Raima explained very well. I'm totally agree with the need. They support for all immigrants, refugee and immigrants who settle into the Canada. But we have problem how we put those organization under the 23(1)(e) as it's defined. That's all my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions on the rebuttal?
Really, the only question, Ms. Tenuara, so the suggestion, I believe the department's position then is that because, and I think actually, Madam Chair, this gets to your question, because the organization, which is a charitable organization, would serve the needs of newcomers and immigrants and refugees, whether they had resources coming into the country or not, because there isn't any clear criteria of or perhaps no criteria of as far as income and such that would qualify or disqualify from these programs. That's why the department has difficulty with the exemption request, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's open for anyone. It's not an age limit, it's not an income limit. It's anyone who as an immigrant, they can go and get the service from this.
But we could agree, and this is, I guess I'm just asking this from a common sense point of view. If you're talking about sort of folks that are coming, refugees that are coming from, countries that are having a very difficult time and are being taken out of that environment, and with immigration, there's certainly times when folks would come into the country with very little, and they would then qualify for this service, correct?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, that's my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Penner, questions on the rebuttal?
I'm not sure how to ask it. It just in terms of the term indigent or indigent. I can't even say it. Indigent. It's not coming out of my mouth. Anyway, is that intended to specifically be tied to financial resources, or is it also mental resources, or like the definition is like poor or needy, but it doesn't necessarily mean financially, does it? I don't know if that's a clear question.
We actually, honestly, we try to put those kind of organizations into this category. But the problem we see, indigents, when we see the definition, we see poor, and it's the resource needed. But these places is open to anyone. But the act very clearly telling it's the, we check any kind of previous cases, how we said, categorize these ones. To us, it's very difficult to, that's why I asked about how Mr. Reimer put the immigrants, which category we put the immigrants in which category. He kind of put, clearly said it's indigent. I understand why it's coming from indigent. That's the only place the immigrants we can fit into, but all the immigrants are indigent. That's our question. immigrant doesn't mean they are indigent. That place is not open for indigent immigrants. This place is open any immigrant, any refugee, that's why we cannot give these kind of places. It's not allow us to give a school tax exempt right now. Until now, we haven't given any of those organizations. That's why we are presenting today. But I don't know I answer your question or not. I have still a question about can we fit in immigrants fit into indigent category? I don't know that.
That's very good. Thank you. That was all for me.
Thank you. Ms. Tenawara, there must be other types of newcomer services or other organizations providing newcomer services in the city. Did you take a look at the treatment of those from a property class and exemption perspective?
We do, but none of those places not giving any school tax exemptions yet. We have Manitoba Start, we have Success Skill Center. Those things are not requested, and I don't know any other places. But we know previously, we cannot tell all the names. We know some places they requested tax exemption, we haven't given. That's all I can tell.
And do you know why they haven't been given?
The exact same thing we have facing right now today. How we are going to define them as an age, indigent or sick person? Because they any age, any capacity, any type of person, either they are refugee or landed immigrant, they can come and get the service from those locations, those organizations.
Okay, perhaps I'll just ask the same question of you, Mr. Reimer. I know it's a little bit out of process, but are you aware?
I'm not aware of a similar organization. My only note, Madam Chair, if you go back to section 23, you need not turn there now, but on our page 15, it's got that section quoted. And the wording of sub E talks about a charitable organization primarily for the purpose of giving relief to indigent persons. So it doesn't mean exclusive by any means. It does, though. It gets back to the same question, Madam Chair, that both you and Ms. Tenawara had asked. Certainly, this programming is open to all, but my suggestion would be, in the absence of anything to the contrary, that I'm guessing this programming is used particularly by those folks who are coming here with very little, versus perhaps immigrants that are coming into the country through sponsorship and that have significant financial resources, who wouldn't need necessarily to the same degree these employment supports, these job training and such. So I do note the word primarily, and I'm asking the board just to note that primarily is the language used in 23(1)(e). But I'm not, to get back to your question, I'm not aware of similar organizations, how they're treated.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. I think that concludes the portion with respect to liability and classification, but I do just want to revisit the valuation side again, if you don't mind. The assessment taxation, Ms. Flood, you did make a recommendation.
Correct.
To reduce, correct? So can you run through every one of those numbers by me again? What is the potential rent? Maybe start with that line.
The potential rent for the recommendation is 128,560.
560. Same vacancy rate.
5%, yes.
And now your new EGI is
122,132.
122,132.
Correct.
You kept your expense rate, you kept your shortfall rate. Your new NOI?
113. 239.
Okay, and you've kept your cap.
Yes,
So your new assessed value is,
rounded to 1,433,000
one,
portion,
1433 for what portion?
the retail.
The retail portion. And then you have the parking lot portion for an additional
85,000.
85,000. Okay, so thank you. Mr. Reimer, you had accepted that.
I don't have formal instructions, but I am in agreement with that value of 1,518,000.
Okay, and you had no dispute over the parking lot portion then, correct?
The parking lot was not under debate. No, it was the revision to the building valuation.
Okay, so, well, I know the numbers have changed and you've accepted the 1,433,000 with respect to yours. You did a workup. I'm just where I'm going with this, and I know it's a little bit out of process just because we're dealing with 3 points of appeal and a recommendation now. Mr. Reimer, you provided a workup for a class. Well, you didn't provide a workup for a class split. What you did was you provided one income stream and then did a class split on the basis of square footage.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Could you describe for us that process, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, and that's a very good point, Madam Chair. So on page 16 of our submission, we're requesting the exemption, and the area occupied by the organization we're talking about is 10,535 square feet. I actually went on the basis of the proportionate share, with that leased area being the numerator and the total leasable area as the denominator. Although, and this gets, I think, to your point, Madam Chair, that was then incorporating a total assessment that didn't include the 85,000. So what I'm going to suggest that we do, Miss Flood, remind me, was the leaving aside the parking lot, deducting that, the total value that we're now coming in as 1,433,000, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Madam Chair, if we take the 1,433,000 and we take, again, this goes back to the pardon me, the same methodology of proportionate share. So the proportionate share is 70.5% of that revised total.
I actually have a question about your methodology, so that's
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, but if you take the proportionate share, then the revised assessment for the exemption request would be 1,010,000 out of the 1,330,000.
Out of the 1,433,000.
Or sorry, 1,433,000. Yep.
So, okay. I need to ask you about that.
Sure, absolutely.
But I will, Ms. Tenawera, Ms. Flood, do you have questions with respect to value on how Mr. Reimer has done these calculations?
No, it's clear.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Ms. Penner?
No, I don't have questions. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Marks?
No, I find it's good for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Okay, this is my question, Mr. Reimer. Well, I understand what you've done in terms of 70% based on square footage. Based on the income approach, if you do 2 separate income streams, that's not the workup. That's not what happens.
Well, except so
because you have different rental rates.
Yes, I do. I do indeed. So if you were to take that approach, So now I'm going to go back to our submission because I understand completely, Madam Chair, what you're getting at. Could we go briefly to my submission on page 14?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you take, just leaving aside the recommendation, if you take my original suggestion for the building valuation, then if you take the needs rent of 55,098,
Yeah.
and divide that by the total that I was suggesting, and these were based on the month-to-month gross leases in place that were netted down. So if you take the 55,098 divided by 94,133, that brings you to 58.5%. Am I right that this is what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
So yeah, no, you know what? And I don't disagree. I do not disagree that, because typically what the department and what we've certainly seen is we will show two separate income streams, one for taxable, one for the 40E or 40S. I took a simplistic approach with the proportionate share. So let me run this calculation now. So if you take 58.5% times the 1,433,000, then that indicated 40S request would be rounded to 839,000. And bluntly, Madam Chair, both of those, they both make sense. And typically with the income approach, the latter and what you're suggesting would be more common.
Okay, and so then that would leave the 60T portion, and I'm assuming you're right, because without knowing all the rental rates, I can't do the math. You're looking at that though from.
I was looking at it from proportionate share, but how about this?
Of the 128, the new.
Yeah, the calculations, the initial calculations I made and what I've just had mentioned earlier based on proportionate share, the upper end then of the exemption request would be 1,010,000. But here's what I'm going to suggest to you. That would be my primary request, but I'm going to now put in an alternate request. So the alternate request for the 40S using the income approach would be 839,000. So that would sort of set the upper and lower boundaries of the school tax exemption, depending on which methodology you use.
Excuse me 1 second. So that would be the exempt portion of school tax then?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's of the 1,433, right?
Exactly right. So the 839,000, Madam Chair, it goes back to my original valuation, where in proportionate terms, and as one would expect, this is the majority of the space. So they are in fact paying a lower rent per square foot. So using that as a notional basis for the calculation, that's where their actual paid rent relative to the overall paid rent is that 58.5%. And I'd certainly suggest the exemption should not be less than that proportionate 58.5%. So if you take the 58.5% and multiply it by the revised assessor recommendation that I'm agreeing with for the building of 1,433,000, that's how you get to the 839,000.
Yeah.
Being the lower bound of the school tax exemption request.
Yeah. When I was originally going through your before the recommendation, I was working out the math, and I understood what you were doing. 100% I understood it, but I just didn't know if it was the correct way.
Yep. No, I don't disagree, Madam Chair.
Okay. Okay. So in front of the panel, we will be making a decision with respect to the 3 points of appeal, with respect to the issue of property classification and liability, and with respect to value, recognizing that the assessment department has made a recommendation to reduce the value to a total of $1,518,000, looking at on the basis of 2 commercial income streams. So we understand, I think, what the issues are. It's a little bit complicated. I think, for my brain on a Friday afternoon. But thank you very much for that. Okay, let's move on then to item number 3. Just give me a minute to get there. Okay, so then item number 3 is file number 24-1886, and this is 73 Hargrave. Ms. Assessor, you may go ahead, but I see that before we deal with property class and liability and taxation, we have an issue for burden of proof, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's introduce the property and let's discuss the burden of proof issue first, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. File number 24-1886, roll number 12092563000, address 73 Hargrave Street, roll year 2025, reference date April 1st, 2023, assessed value 596,000. On my page, sorry, starting on page 10 through till 13 is for the non-compliance part. It was a request for an extension for the income and expense mailer. And then we didn't receive it.
Okay. Okay, that's your evidence?
For that portion of for the non-compliance, yes.
Yeah, we're just dealing with the non-compliance right now. Mr. Reimer, questions?
I have no questions and I have nothing further to add, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Penner?
No questions for me, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Marks?
Yeah, no questions for me, thank you.
Thank you. I have no questions either. So the panel will go in camera first to discuss the issue of the non-compliance. Thank you. Thank you very much. The panel has considered the assessor's request for burden of proof to be placed on the applicant, and we are granting that request based on the evidence presented by the assessor. So that would mean, Mr. Reimer, that the burden of proof shifts to you for already for class and liability, but also for value. So would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Could I ask the board members and Ms. Flood, Ms. Tenor to turn to page 14 of our submission? So there's going to be a few moving parts, Madam Chair, and I'll explain this the suggestions as concisely as I can. So the request initially on page 14, as you can see, there was to reduce the assessed value to 411,000. I did have the opportunity to review this file with Ms. Flood and have discussions with her prior to the hearing. And
Mr. Reimer, I'm sorry. I should have reminded you. Could you please read in the roll number?
oh, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank
So
you. And then we'll get to your page 14.
Yep.
Thank
yep.
you.
So the property that is currently being heard is 73 Hargrave Street. Your board file number 24-1896.
1886.
1886.
Thanks.
Roll number is 12-092-563-000.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So now we're on page 14.
Let's do this properly, Madam Chair. I agree with you.
Okay.
So if we go to page 6 briefly.
Okay.
Top of page 6, that's a photo of the subject. Just so you know, it's a converted residence located at 73 Hargrave Street. Quick description at the bottom of page 7. It is on City of Winnipeg's commemorative list. It's got a gross area above grade of 3850. That includes a total leasable area of 3,569 square feet. Now, if we go briefly to page 14. So as you can see there, the initial request that had been made to the board this afternoon was to reduce the value to 411,000. I did have an opportunity to review this assessment with Ms. Flood, and I don't presume to speak on behalf of the department as to how we got there, but what I will tell you is that we both are going to be making a joint recommendation for a value of 506,000, so 506,000. And what I will tell you now, and again, this is why I don't presume to speak for the department, but I will tell you how I arrived at it because it does have a bearing, Madam Chair, on the exemption request. So my revised potential income, the initial, as you could see on page 14, was 40,713. The revised potential income that we calculate for the agreed upon amount is 47,497. And while we're on this figure, Madam Chair, I'll state right now that my calculations of the individual, I'm applying a higher market rent for the main floor space, which is the 1,434 square feet. I've increased that market rate to $16. And for the upper floor space, I've applied a market rate of $11.50 a square foot for all three premises because it's that upper floor, that entire upper floor area that relates to the exemption request. And so the reason I tell you this is that in my calculations, the Friendship Center, which is the entity that I'm requesting the exemption for, using my income and the division of the income among my revised market rents would be 42.27% of the total. And I'll explain that further in a couple of minutes when I get to the exemption request. So going back to the valuation, our total potential net market rent is 47,497. I've continued to apply a vacancy allowance of 15%. So that results in an effective gross income of 40,372. Pardon me. And then I haven't changed any of the expense parameters as to the shortfall rate of $7, the 1% for non-recoverable, 2% for structural, total of 3% in any event. And so the revised NOI that I calculate is $35,413. And I've capitalized that at 7%. So that's how I'm coming in at the 506,000. Madam Chair, did you want to pause just on the value issue then to confirm Ms. Flood's agreement with that value, and then I can proceed to the exemption, or what would you have me do?
Yeah, let's talk about the value since you've presented it. Ms. Flood, questions?
No questions for me.
Okay, Ms. Penner?
No questions for me, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marks?
And no questions for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Reimer, because I'm presuming you're going to go this way, that 15% vacancy allowances, you're keeping that, right?
In my assumptions, in my valuation
In your
factors,
assumptions,
yes.
yes.
I did keep the 15% based on the performance leading up to the reference date, yes.
So that 15%, if we were to do two income streams for an exempt property and a class 60, that 15% vacancy would also apply to the exempt portion?
Yeah, again, in my methodology, I've just used one income stream, but if you were to split it in two, it wouldn't change the proportion because the 15% would be applied to each. So that's why I suggested the proportion based on the potential net market rent, because my assumption would be if you use the two income streams, the fully taxable and the 40S, the same parameters right from vacancy down through cap rate would be applied to each.
And why would a 15% vacancy apply to the exempt portion?
Well, actually, the bulk of the portion that's now being suggested is exempt was in fact vacant for a long time leading up to the reference date. This occupant only took possession in the late fall of 2023. So this is all post, as far as the exemption request and the occupant we're suggesting that attracts the exemption, it was all post reference, but as of the reference date, actually fully 1,200 out of the call it 2,100 feet was in fact vacant.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Flood, we're talking about the value, and Mr. Reimer has suggested a joint that you've come to a joint recommendation of $506,000, and he's presented his parameters. Can you speak to this, please?
We are in agreement for the 506,000.
Okay. And the parameters necessarily? Or
Yeah.
just the total value?
We can agree to the total value.
Just the total value?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Reimer, then to the issue of class and liability.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could ask the panel members and the assessor to turn to page 15, please. So the request in this case, and this relates, Madam Chair, to the main floor space, as you might recall, is owner occupied by Hargrave Financial Group. So this exemption request relates to the upper floor space, a total of 2,134 square feet. So the request again is under 23(1)(e). This is a tenancy of the Manitoba Association of Friendship Centers. And at the bottom of page 15, I start describing, and they provide a number of services. They're focused on Indigenous, helping Indigenous folks with a number of programs that they provide. There's counseling services, there's family and youth programming, and this is at the bottom of page 15. Cultural programs, educational assistance, and employment programs, including tutoring and mentoring programs. And I'll go through some of the attachments briefly, but it's, again, we're suggesting that, and the key term is indigent, providing the disadvantaged folks. And I interpret indigent to be, admittedly, I'm interpreting it not narrowly. I'm interpreting it to mean those folks that are otherwise disadvantaged in society. And I'd suggest that certainly the wording could most certainly be interpreted that way, where you're not necessarily talking about someone who's penniless and destitute, but rather individuals who are fundamentally disadvantaged and who are doing their best to avoid some of the more serious problems like homelessness and addiction issues and these kinds of things. So on page 15, that's the summary of the Friendship Centers. And if we then turn to some of the materials, and again, I've presented a number of pages. If we go to page 35, this is the confirmation. Again, one of the requirements is that the organization be a registered charity, and on pages 34 through 37 actually is the confirmation that they are in fact registered. And at the top of page 35, the brief synopsis of the organization that they provided to the federal government is engaging youth, elders, and community in land-based education centered on Indigenous culture. That in and of itself wouldn't seem to qualify it, but I'd like to draw the attention of the boards to some of the services that they're providing, again, taken from their website. If I could ask, Madam Chair, if you could turn to page 38. So this is now from the website of this organization. At the bottom of page 38, it talks about youth engagement and friendship centers providing leadership development, cultural activities, and safe spaces for Indigenous youth. But then even more importantly, on page 39, if you take a look at the roughly halfway down social support and advocacy, there it talks about counseling services where the centers provide culturally sensitive and trauma-informed counseling services to support individuals and families facing personal, emotional, and mental health challenges, and advocacy and referral services assisting individuals in navigating the various systems, including housing, education, healthcare, and social services. So these are very fundamental, basic needs that are being met through some of this program and the assistance with this programming and meeting those very basic needs, which again I suggest goes squarely back into the concept of indigent persons for the purpose of 23(1)(e). There's also just underneath that educational employment supports, educational assistance, employment programs, again, to try and help for job training and maximize chances for employment. Then there's only a couple of other points. If we could turn to page 46, please. And I thought this was an interesting statement. At the bottom of page 46, the last paragraph and the third sentence says friendship centers respond to the required needs of these individuals and fills in the gaps where services and resources are lacking within the communities. Working to improve the social determinants of health for urban Indigenous people, friendship centers provide programs and services in areas such as elder and senior programs, youth programming, early childhood education, mental health and counseling, food insecurity, cultural program, justice and prevention programs, and emergency services. So again, I'd suggest that fits very squarely within the concept of providing assistance to the disadvantaged or indigent members of our society. There was well, that might have been it. There's a lot of pages, and I'll leave it with the board to review, but those are the highlights I wanted to draw out as far as the programming and services provided by this organization. And again, suggesting that conceptually 23-1E is fundamentally it's speaking to providing assistance to disadvantaged folks who otherwise might fall through the cracks or become in a very, very precarious position as far as housing and health and such. Certainly this institution appears to be helping those folks to avoid those very serious pitfalls, and therefore suggesting 23-1E be applied to this occupant. Again, I included a copy of the WASO decision confirming that the leasehold interest is sufficient for 23-1E. So now, Madam Chair, recall that in my calculation of the revised assessment, I had changed some of the potential rents as to how I got to the revised value of 506,000. So in my submission, again, I'd used initially the proportionate share, which is based on square footage being 59.8%. So that would set the upper boundary in this case. So if you take the revised suggested assessment that Ms. Flood and I are recommending, 506,000, if you use 59.8%, which is the proportionate share, that then would indicate a 40S request of 303,000 rounded. But crucially, Madam Chair, I ran the math based on the previous hearing, and so with my revised calculations as to the potential rent, the proportionate share of income in my revised calculation for all of the upper floor space that is now occupied by the Friendship Center is 42.27%. So if you take the, and again, I would suggest this would represent the lower boundary of the exemption request. If you take the 506,000 and you multiply that by the 42.27% effectively as the assessment caused by the upper floor space, then the exemption request becomes amended to 214,000. So 214,000 would represent, I'd suggest, the lower bound of the exemption. The upper bound would be by proportionate share at 303,000. I'll leave it with the board to determine first and foremost if the exemption should be granted, and if so, those boundaries. And I'd suggest, Madam Chair, as I said earlier, I'm agreeing with you in many cases that I've seen. The proportionate share used to be used more commonly, but certainly in the last number of years, it is the assessment using the income approach, the assessment caused that forms the basis of the exemption, and therefore the 42.27% certainly stands to reason, and that the value of 214,000 based on that methodology would be that request. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Tenawara or Ms. Flood, questions on the issue of class and liability?
My question for clarification, Mr. Reimer, on your page 34, with the registered charity, it says Winnipeg Indigenous Friendship Center, Inc., but their website is Manitoba Association of Friendship Centers. Can you just clarify?
I had understood that this is the same organization, Ms. Flood. It's got the when I typed in the Friendship Centers, Inc., it came up with the Winnipeg Indigenous Friendship Centers, but I'm going to say very, very certain that it's the same organization. The Friendship Center is the for lack of a better term, the business name or the trade name.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marks, question on class and liability?
No, I'm good, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Penner?
No, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. And I was going to ask the same question as Ms. Flood and also with respect to indigent, but you've covered that off.
And Madam Chair, I'll just make one quick reference just to clarify that point about the organization. If you just note, you need not turn there, but note on page 41, the specific name that's used there is Winnipeg Indigenous Friendship Center, which is not doesn't have ink in it, but it is the same organization.
Okay. Are there other friendship centers in Manitoba?
I've not researched or encountered them, Madam Chair. This is the first time I've dealt with this particular organization, so I'm not
Okay.
aware. Yep. And
you indicated that they've just begun leasing this space in the fall of 2023, so relatively
Fall of
new.
23. Yep.
Okay.
The organization or the umbrella, I guess, I don't think the umbrella is new, but their presence at this site is certainly in the fall of 2023. Yep.
Do you know where they were previous?
I do not. No.
Okay. It looks like their registration was only April of 2022 is my read, based on what's there in page 34.
And so it
their
is
registration as a charity. That is.
Yep. April 1st, 22. Yes, I had not noticed that. Yes, but I see it there. Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. I've sort of lost track, but I think we're on to the assessment department's presentation with respect to class and liability. Am I correct in assuming same as previous, you would just have rebuttal evidence?
Yeah, we do have rebuttal evidence only.
Okay, so give us a minute to get back to that. Okay. All right, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to talk a lot. We talk enough, I guess, about this 23(1)(e) school tax exemption. Yes, I understood. Mr. Reimer is looking forward to put this Manitoba Friendship Association Center also under the 23(1)(e) indigent category. I understand where it's coming from. So it's all the indigenous people are indigent. That's not my call. We cannot put all of the people come to get the care of Manitoba Association of Friendship Center, as we cannot treat everyone come there as indigent. So that's why we kind of reject from the beginning what we are granting 23(1)(e) request for is in still I'm kind of presenting not to grant it to 23(1)(e) for only based on the indigenous category. Thinking about all the indigenous people come there to put it into this category. So I'm asking not to make any classification split at this point. I don't have much to talk. Mr. Reimer explained everything. My documentation is all the similar information I got from the website. It's all showing they treated for any indigenous people come there. They treated exact same way. It doesn't matter they need help or they don't need help or they treat the same way. So this organization also not fall into the category of 23(1)(e) for as our presentation. And I'm asking not to make any classifications at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reimer, questions on that rebuttal?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're coming from the same place, Madam Chair. Fundamentally, I go back to the word primarily being used and not exclusively in 23(1)(e). And if you look at our materials and if you look at Ms. Tenuera's materials on her page 10 that talk about some of the social supports and community and housing resources, it gets back to recall that one of the items I referred the board to was assistance in very basic needs as far as housing, as far as mental health, counseling and such. So I'd ask the board to consider, notwithstanding that, and I don't disagree with Ms. Tenuera, it's not necessarily, this organization is set up to certainly provide assistance and programming to a wide range of individuals, but certainly the folks that might be considered in that technical term indigent or significantly disadvantaged, I'd suggest would be very much part of the programming and ask the board to consider accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marks, questions on the rebuttal?
Yeah, just one. Would this not be more in tune to First Nations and Métis peoples in a situation like this, especially this building, where there wouldn't be anybody else really going there other than First Nations and perhaps Métis?
I can answer that certainly, Madam Chair. Mr. Marks, did you want, Madam Chair, should I answer that or?
Well, let's see if the city can respond, and if not, then of course. The question was directed to the assessors.
Okay.
So the assessors, do you have a response to that?
As per the website information, we mostly see indigenous people, either Red Indians or Métis or anyone. That's what we see in the pictures in the website. Other than that, we don't have any knowledge about who can go there.
And
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Reimer, if you have something to add.
I can just say very clearly this entire organization and the entire set of programming is geared towards Indigenous individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Penner?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Okay. And I have no questions either. So I think that will conclude item number 3. And is everyone agreeable to a 10-minute recess? Yes? Okay. Let's recess for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 2:35. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to call our meeting back to order. Moving along on our agenda, we're now dealing with item number 4, which is file number 24-1762. This is 164 Fort Street. Ms. Flood, when you are ready, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, file number 24-1762, roll number 12093086000, address 164 Fort Street, roll year 2025 with the reference date of April 1st, 2023, for an assessed value of $437,000. We do have another recommendation for this property. So give me a second. So we have a new potential rate rent of 31,000. Same 5% vacancy, expenses still at 3%, shortfall at $7. New net operating income is 27,866 with a revised capitalization rate at 7% for a total of 398,000.
Okay, let me just repeat that then. You have a revised potential income of 31,000.
Yes.
You're maintaining your same parameters at a 5% vacancy, 3% expenses, $7 shortfall. Your revised NOI is 27,866 and a new cap rate of 7%. Your new revised assessment is $398,000.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Reimer, to you, do you accept that recommendation?
We are in agreement with 398,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Penner, do you have questions on the rec?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marks?
None for me, thank you.
Okay, and I don't either. So thank you very much, Ms. Flood and Mr. Reimer, for that.
You.
We'll move to item number 5 on our agenda. This is file number 24-2396-405 Ellis Avenue. Ms. Flood, whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. File number 24-2396, roll number 13053014100, address 405 Ellis Avenue, roll year 2025, a reference date of April 1st, 2023, assessed value $1,523,000. And again, we have another recommendation for this one. The new potential rent is $82,878. 4% vacancy, no change. 3% expenses, no change. $9 shortfall, no change. And a revised capitalization rate at 6.2% for a new value of $1,218,000.
Okay, and what was your revised NOI, please?
Oh, sorry, 75,523.
Okay, I'll just repeat that just so we make sure we have the numbers. You have a new potential rent of $82,878. You've made no changes to your parameters for vacancy, expenses, or shortfall. Your revised NOI is $75,523 and an increase to the cap rate to 6.2 for a revised assessment of $1,218,000.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Reimer, do you accept the recommendation?
We're getting there by different means, Madam Chair, but I'm in agreement with a final value of $1,218,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. And thank you, Ms. Flood, for that. Questions, Ms. Penner, on the rec?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks.
And none for me, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes item 5.
Thank you.
Item number 6 on our agenda. This is file number 24-1643, 340 Donald Street. Ms. Flood, when you are ready, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. File number 24-1643, roll number 13052810000, address 340 Donald Street, roll year 2025 with the reference date of April 1st, 2023, assessed value $832,000. And again, we have a recommendation.
Okay.
We have a new potential rent of $100,040. We have the vacancy still at 25%, expenses still at 3%, shortfall $7 with the new net operating income of $46,317. And no change to the capitalization rate at 7.9%. For a new value of $586,000.
Okay, I'll repeat that then. You're making a verbal recommendation to reduce the assessment to $586,000.
Yes.
And that's based on a new potential income of $100,040. No changes to vacancy, expense, or shortfall. Your revised NOI is $46,317 with a cap rate of 7.9.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Reimer, do you accept the recommendation of
We're-
586,000?
We are in agreement with 586,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marks, do you have questions on the recommendation?
Not for me, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Penner?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have no questions either. So I appreciate you working together, Ms. Flood and Mr. Reimer, on those recommendations. Okay, and then I guess that now that we've heard all items on our agenda, this hearing is now adjourned. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
You
Thank
too.
Mr. Reimer.
Bye
You
now.
have as well.
Thanks.
What did we get?
You too.
Jay, I have